Welcome to the studio with Kristoff Malejczuk. Yet again, I am predictably recording this episode out of my rented duplex in Boulder, Colorado. But I'm not a fan of being predictable. So I came up with this strategy, this idea, this plan to escape the United States and go to Ecuador. Now, this idea wasn't a permanent relocation. It was just to switch things up for a couple of months. And my plan was to continue working from home, so I'd resume my day job while I was there. I would just be doing it from a more exciting, sexier, more romantic environment. Latin America, Ecuador. Ecuador first piqued my interest when I saw that my favorite YouTube yoga instructor was located there. The channel is called Breathe and Flow and is run by Flo, a man, it's a very common German abbreviation for Florian, and his wife, Brie. They have this great channel, Breathe and Flow, really strong yoga practices, but they really understand what yoga is about and have a nice approach to mindfulness and the breath and presence. So I enjoy their practices. And they live a very cool lifestyle. They're digital nomads. They travel the world with just a backpack. They settle down for a few months in some location, film, make videos there, and then continue on their way. A really exciting lifestyle. And they actually both used to be based in Silicon Valley. Not much different from me. I saw that they were in Ecuador, and they were in this small beach town of Montañita. And I looked up Montañita, and oh man, was I drawn to this place. Montañita is on the coast of Ecuador. Ecuador is located in South America on the west coast of the continent, and Montañita is a town on the west coast of Ecuador, so right along the ocean. And it's also a spot that's known for having the best surfing in Ecuador. And this really appealed to me because I want to be surfing a lot more. Right now, I'm in an environment where I can go skiing. That's great. But I think I'd rather surf. Now, I'm not a great surfer, but I've had some pretty fantastic experiences surfing. I think that it is a place where, at least for me, I can connect with the world in this pretty intimate way. I remember this one surfing experience that I had. I caught a wave, went into the shore, then I got off the board when I got close to the shore, and then this big wave was coming toward me, and it just hit me, and it's pulling me underwater, and I'm getting tossed and turned about, and I am like a rag doll. The ocean is having its way with me. But I wasn't too panicked. I was able to get a deep breath before being, what's the right word for that? I want to say bouleversé, that's a French word. Before being bowled over by the wave, I was able to take a deep breath in. So I felt fine as I was being tossed and turned underwater. But it was amazing to be so powerless and to just be at the whim of this much larger body, the ocean. Then I come out of the water, but the wave crashing into me had been so loud that I could no longer really hear. There was just this ringing in my ears, and I was looking out over the ocean, the sun on the horizon, and there was this amazing feeling of peace that was resonating through me. So experiences like that are what draw me to surfing and are what make me want to surf a lot more. So I see, okay, these digital nomads who I have this pretty cool but one-sided relationship with because they have no idea who I am, are based in Ecuador. They do neat things. Let me research this place where they're at. Oh, it has amazing surfing. It's this smaller town. I don't want to be in a big city right now. Unfortunately, COVID exists in South America and there are curfews and lockdown measures, but I think in these smaller towns, things are a bit more open. I just thought that being by the ocean in a place that, oh, by the way, is very affordable and also happens to have the US dollar as the currency, that just makes things so convenient. I don't need to worry about switching out my money for other things or getting money from ATMs and paying for currency exchange fees. So I'd be paying for things in US dollars, things are way cheaper. I could even keep my rented duplex here in Boulder for the couple months that I would go to Ecuador. It's not a big deal. Sure, I'd be out a bit of money, but hey, I make money. What's the point of money if you're not going to spend it on powerful experiences? And I was intending for this experience to be so fantastic and transformative such that it would by far offset the monetary cost of me flying there and renting a place for a couple months. I saw in this town they also had a Brazilian jiu-jitsu club that I would have surely joined. I would love to start rolling a lot more. I rolled a small bit pre-pandemic, I think maybe 7 times. I went to this place in San Francisco. That's something I want to get a lot more into. So this place, Montañita, was perfect. This small town in Ecuador, it's exotic, it's on the ocean, it has surfing. I would be able to practice yoga there next to the ocean. I'd be able to practice Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I'd be able to be eating all of this wonderful fresh fruit that's grown in that climate, amazing coffee, not to mention the great weather that they would have there. Also, going on the Wikipedia page, you see that in 1960, a bunch of hippies went to Montañita and settled down there. So Montañita is also a hippie enclave, which is just perfect for me. Now, personally, I would characterize myself as being 1/3 bro, 1/3 hippie, and 1/3 intellectual. But I think the hippie third is growing right now, and surely moving to Montañita would have upped its ratio a bit further. So this hippie aspect to this Ecuadorian town was just yet another draw. I mean, this place was perfect. So sure, by all accounts, going to Montañita, Ecuador sounds like a cool destination, a fun, potentially transformative place to be for a couple months. But what really drew me to it was the possibility for growth. If I reflect upon my life and I isolate the periods during which I've experienced the most amount of personal growth, I can do that quite easily. They would be the 8 months that I spent as an intern in Zurich in Switzerland and the 8 months that I spent as an intern in Cupertino in California. The first of these experiences, when I was in Zurich, I was thrown into this pretty foreign environment. My German was quite poor. I was working this industry job, hadn't worked in industry before. I had to figure out my own housing, the accommodation, the food, the transport. I was just tossed into this pretty foreign environment and being forced to deal with so many novel stimuli and to stay afloat and survive and then eventually thrive was just a great experience for me. I had to adopt a lot of responsibility. I had to learn things. I had to be open-minded. I had to adapt to another way of life. And I grew a lot from that experience. And then my 8 months that I was in California, I mean, sure, that's also a novel environment, but I mean, hey, going from Canada to the US, what are the big differences? Maybe just the weather was really nice in California. I think when I was in that environment, I actually grew a lot as a result of the struggle. I was working so hard, probably the first time that I had truly, really worked hard and consistently at something in my life. And that was very transformative. And it was being in that novel environment. So you look at the 2 places where I had grown the most were 8-month periods in novel environments. And I would love to continue chasing growth and to develop myself and also, if possible, at the same time, have a great time and fantastic experiences. Because sure, struggle develops you, but hopefully you can also develop yourself in an environment that is not devoid of struggle, but maybe where at least the struggle is pleasurable. So I thought, hey, 2 months abroad in Ecuador, that will be fantastic. I will be in a foreign environment. I mean, my Spanish is not great, so there would definitely be struggle. In my fourth and final year of university back in Canada, I had to take a non-engineering elective, so I chose to take a bird course, a course that I could just put in very little effort and get very high grades in. And I wanted to take a bird course that would at least be stimulating and a bit enjoyable. So I chose Spanish 101. I knew it would be easy because I speak French, and Spanish and French bear a lot of similarities. It was also a first year course, Spanish 101. So how hard could it be? Well, I was correct. It was extremely easy, but I also enjoyed it a lot. So in the second semester of my fourth year, my final semester at university, for the first time in my academic career, I overloaded my schedule. I took one course more than I had to, and that course was Spanish 102. And I overloaded my schedule just because I wanted to continue learning. I thought the professor was cool, the class had a good atmosphere. It was nice to not be around engineers for that 50-minute period of the day. It was good. So I had 2 semesters of Spanish in university. That's my only exposure to Spanish. And then right after graduating, I took a trip to Cuba with my mom. And this was a nice time for me to share with my mother because I don't live in Canada anymore. I don't see my parents very much. And I don't know how many trips I'm going to go on with my mother in the future. So we went to Cuba together, but I capitalized on this experience to speak Spanish with the Cubans. For the first few days that we were there for a week in total. For the first few days, I wasn't perfectly fluent. I mean, my exposure had really been in an academic environment. But then I got a bit better and a bit more comfortable, and oh man, it was cool. So I would go to the gym every day, and we were staying on a resort, and none of these resort goers, none of these Westerners were hitting the gym, but I was. And the only other people hitting the gym were the Cubans who worked at the resort. So I started to develop these bonds with them. And now their English, some of them had quite good English, some of them, their English was mediocre. But they could communicate with me in Spanish, and they dug that I was trying to speak Spanish. So I ended up talking to these guys about communism. Now, one thing about communist countries that you may know is that they don't necessarily have what we would call freedom of the press. So the way the people are actually living doesn't get outside of the country because they don't have a free press that gets that information out to the rest of the world. So I was talking to these Cubans in Spanish about communism and learning that things weren't as peachy as the Cuban government would love the rest of the world to think. These people were telling me about how you can't leave your house without locking it, and even if you do, your windows might get smashed. It didn't sound like the most crime-void society that you could imagine. They were talking about other factors of communism, the fact that no one has money and there's not incentive to work hard because even if you do, you're not going to climb up the socioeconomic hierarchy. Regardless, that's an aside. So my Spanish reached a point where I could maintain a political conversation with some Cubans. But also, that was back in 2019. That was May of 2019, and since then, I've spoken very little Spanish. Right now, the most that I could do is probably chop it up with an Uber driver. So now if I were to go to Montañita, if I were to go to Ecuador, I would surely struggle. And that would be great because it would be uncomfortable for me, but it wouldn't really be dangerous for me. I wouldn't be in dire straits, but I would be put in these situations where I'd be forced to innovate. I'd be forced to come up with solutions that for me were novel to be able to communicate, to obtain what I wanted, to have the lifestyle that I desired and experiences that I was seeking. So, Ecuador, a place that would both be fun and exciting, but also a place that would be filled with opportunity for me to continue developing myself as a person. Now, this is all in my head, but I need to get workplace approval. So, first person I ask my boss. I say, hey boss, how do you feel about me working from home from Ecuador for a couple months? Now, my boss is so cool. He's such a great guy. He says, yeah, that sounds fine. Let's see what HR says. So then he sends an email to HR. He mentions that I'm a great employee. Thank you, boss. And HR, they take 2 weeks. They get back to me this past week, and they say no. For taxation reasons, you can't do that. For visa reasons, you can't do that. You're only able to work from Canadian and American locations. So these Ecuadorian dreams are dashed. How devastating. As a consolation, I might go to Florida for a couple of weeks instead. One of my closest friends just moved there. Now, Florida is a place of freedom, and I'm coming at that from a COVID standpoint. I think things there are pretty open, and I'm a big fan of freedom. I'm not a big fan of people needing to shut down their businesses. Now, look, Colorado's in a pretty good place. I think all businesses are open. You have to wear a mask wherever you go. That does make sense to wear a mask because it stops the spread of the virus. That makes sense. So if I do go to Florida, I'll be in a somewhat exotic location, a fairly exciting location, and I guess a fairly free location as well. If by free we mean an absence of COVID mandates. And my buddy Graham would surely be the first podcast guest, the first guest on the studio. I'm sure you guys would love what he has to say. That would be fun. So that's plan B, because Ecuador is a no-go, so consolation prize is Florida. So me being barred from going to Ecuador, that's very sad. But there was another tragedy that happened this past week that many people, not all people, but probably most people, would consider to be at least as great a tragedy as my Ecuadorian dreams being crushed. And that would be the shootings in Georgia. Last Tuesday, a white gunman went on a shooting spree at 3 different spas in Ackworth, a city just outside of Atlanta, and in Atlanta itself, killing 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian women. Needless to say, this is horrendous. And I have been asked by many people to give my opinion on this shooting. Now, you might be wondering, well, Kristoff, why would they want your opinion on this shooting? Wouldn't they maybe rather have a scholar of race, or a scholar of sex, or a scholar of mental illnesses, or a scholar of someone who looks at mass shootings talk about this subject, someone with some iota of expertise? Why would they want your opinion, Kristoff? Well, these people want my opinion because they know that I went to the University of Waterloo and that I've been to China once. So in their eyes, not my eyes, in their eyes, I am an expert on Asian American race relations. Now, if you find this to be funny, I find it to be funny as well, especially because of where I'm from. I am from the town of Petawawa, Ontario, in northeastern Ontario. And in my high school, I wouldn't say that we didn't have racial diversity, but we had very little racial diversity. I remember the first black kid, and actually only black kid, in our high school. His name was Stenio, and Stenio came from Montreal. He had to move from Montreal to Petawawa. Stenio was he was a refugee. He had to move from Montreal to Petawawa to escape gang violence. The only black person in our high school was there because of gang violence. Now, the reason that he changed schools is in Montreal, there was this girl, and she was apparently this pretty attractive girl, and a bunch of kids were into her, and Stenio liked her, but this girl also liked Stenio, so Stenio was the lucky one. All the guys liked her, but she liked Stenio. Unfortunately for Stenio, a lot of the other guys who liked her were part of a gang. And he came to our school when we were in elementary school, I think around grade 7 or 8 or something, maybe grade 6. But he came to the school before high school. So this means that the kids who were upset at Stenio, who were in this gang, who wanted to kill Stenio, who threatened Stenio with violence such that he had to move provinces as a refugee, effectively a refugee. This was a gang of grade schoolers. As an adult, I could hardly imagine something less threatening. A bunch of 11-year-olds? I feel like it would be very hard for a bunch of 11-year-olds to get me to do anything. Regardless, they were out to get Stenio, and he came to Petawawa. So that was how we had one black person in our high school. Not super diverse. I remember a story that one of my older friends told me. He was a soccer referee. I was a soccer referee when I was in high school. And after a game, he was driving me home. And this was a couple years before I went to university. And the guy driving me home, his name was Kyle McLaren. Kyle McLaren was going to the University of Ottawa. He was a couple years into his studies. And as he was driving me home, he told me this story that happened to him. In Kyle's first year at the University of Ottawa, the very first week is Frosh week. So it's a week without classes of fun activities. People are dressed up, people bond. You had all these kids come to university for the first time, and they do things that are fun and build spirit and hopefully build friendships. This is called Frosh Week. People dress up in costumes. Maybe people were pirates or ninjas or dinosaurs or what have you. But then Frosh Week ends and then classes begin and it's just regular school. So Kyle is there after Frosh Week, his very first day of school, and he sees that some people still in the Frosh Week spirit are dressed up. And in particular, he sees some people in class dressed up as ninjas. So class ends, he turns to the guy beside him and he says, "Hey man, what's up with these people still dressed up as ninjas?" The guy beside him says, "Oh, those are actually women wearing niqabs." Due to the lack of cultural and racial diversity in Petawawa, this guy had never seen anyone wearing a burqa before. So that's where I'm from. Now, despite being raised in this environment that was fairly homogenous from a cultural perspective, I somehow ended up getting drawn deeply into hip-hop music and hip-hop culture upon getting to university. I'll go on a small tangent here. Since Friday, I've been bumping this project that was just dropped. It just came out. It's from Benny the Butcher, an East Coast rapper. He teamed up with producer Harry Fraud to make a short project. It's under 30 minutes long. It's called The Plugs I Met 2, following up on Benny's 2019 project, The Plugs I Met. Now this rap is so real. This is, in my opinion, and I'd say it's a fairly uncontroversial stance, this is the best rap album to come out in 2021 so far. It's raw, it's gritty, it's East Coast, the production is wonderful, and the bars are hard. I just want to read a couple snippets of Benny the Butcher's lyrics. One of the tracks is called Live By It. Here are the lyrics. Now, also, before I read them, Benny the Butcher used to be involved in a life of crime. He sold cocaine, but not just a bit of cocaine. He sold cocaine well. He was a top dog. So he identifies to some extent with the Italian mafia. The album artwork shows Italian mobsters. He was a big deal cocaine mover. He's been around drugs, he's been around violence, he's been around murder. His friends are in jail. He's real and he talks about it. This project is gritty and authentic. So on this track, Live By It, Benny says, "This heat clappin' makes street savages peace advocates. I'm on the West Coast with a bitch that's East African. I used to take a 9 out of a brick and repackage it." That's so good. He rhymes street savages with peace advocates with East African with repackage it. He says, I used to take a 9 out of a brick and repackage it. That means that he had a brick of cocaine that's 32 ounces, and he had a 9, a handgun, hidden away inside of this brick. So he takes a gun out of this pile of cocaine and repackages the cocaine to then sell it. That is so hard. I'll read another lyrical excerpt from another one of the songs off of this project. This track is called No Instructions. Benny says, "You not safe. This clip in my new Glock great. Long enough to do a drive-by for 2 blocks straight. I'll put money on your head from a shoebox bank and leave the murder unsolved like the Tupac case." Wow. He has an internal rhyme in that first line. He rhymes "you not safe" with "new Glock great." Long enough to do a drive-by for 2 blocks straight. That's so hard. Then he says, "I'll put money on your head from a shoebox bank." That means he'll pay to have you killed, and he'll pay for that money from his shoebox bank, aka money that he just has in cash inside of a shoebox, and leave the murder unsolved like the Tupac case. I've been bumping this stuff all weekend. Benny the Butcher and Harry Fraud with the hottest album of 2021, The Plugs I Met Too. But now back to violence against Asians. That was a bit of a divergence. I was messaging one of my Asian friends. In the middle of our text conversation, I say, "Did you feel more emotional and affected as a result of being from the same race?" Her reply is, "What irks me is that it took the shooting for our peers to decide that they care about racism." Now, this is a very astute point, and while it is unfortunately true that no one seemed to care at all about racism against Asians until this shooting, it's also very predictable behavior. I mean, we saw the same things during the BLM crisis this past summer, this past year in 2020. No one cared about black people getting shot. Then suddenly everyone cared about black people getting shot. They cared enough to post about it on social media. And I mean, it takes a lot for people to post on social media. It's your representation going out to the world. So people thought that this event mattered enough to them that they would post about it on social media for Black Lives Matter, not even just to their Instagram stories, but to their actual Instagram timeline. And people were saying, "No justice, no peace, no justice, no peace." Now it's a few months later, it's 2021. I'm not aware of any recent killing of black people at the hands of white police officers. And I hear silence on the front of black liberation and equality. I mean, people were saying no justice, no peace. Well, it seems pretty peaceful now, so clearly that means that you thought justice was brought about. Either that, or you only care when things are relevant in the media and in a place where you can grandstand in front of your peers. But who am I to make these accusations? I didn't even post a black square to my Instagram timeline in 2020. That means that I must be racist. Now, speaking of racists, I do see a big missed opportunity in this very unfortunate shooting. They say, never let a crisis go to waste, and I think this crisis has partially gone to waste. The trending hashtag that is promoting Asian equality and stopping violence against Asians and racism against Asians is hashtag Stop Asian Hate. Now, if I were to have been to guess, if I hadn't known this, I would have thought it would have been Asian Lives Matter. What you will recall is that the counter chant to Black Lives Matter was All Lives Matter. And if you look at the acronyms for Asian Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, you'll see that they're the same, ALM. Now, here's what could have happened. The Asian activists could have gotten together and say, okay, let's organize an ALM protest this weekend. Well, peaceful protest just to raise awareness against the heinous crimes against Asians that we have just witnessed. They would have been pumping this out on social media, and people outside of the Asian community would have seen this, including white nationalists. These white nationalists would have seen, oh wow, there's an ALM protest happening nearby. We haven't been to one of those in a while, but we still have all of our signage from last summer. This is my impression of a white nationalist couple planning to go to an Asian Lives Matter protest. Hey, honey, did you see that there's an ALM protest happening this weekend?
Oh no, I didn't. I didn't think those things were happening anymore.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, we haven't been to one for a while, but they were always really fun. I mean, last time we went to one was when a black guy got shot last summer.
Oh yeah, this sounds fun. Let's go, but do we still have our ALM signs?
Well, yeah, we do. They're in the basement. I just need to remember where they are.
Oh, they must be next to our collection of Nazi memorabilia.
No, I think after I cleaned the basement after I cleaned the basement, I put them next to our Klan outfits. Yes, I know exactly where they are. Let's go. So now you would get these white nationalists going to these Asian Lives Matter protests, but they would be thinking it was a different ALM. They would be thinking it was All Lives Matter, but it doesn't matter because their signs still say ALM. So then at this protest, you would get these Asian activists and you would get these white nationalists, and then the white nationalists would realize, oh hey, these Asians aren't so bad. And then you could have a beautiful linking of the Asian American and the white nationalist patriot communities. But that's not happening because the hashtag that was went with was not Asian Lives Matter, it was Stop Asian Hate. And the acronym for that is SAH, SA. Now if you say it a bit more relaxed, a bit more laid back, it becomes SA. And I'm not mad at that because really when you have a slogan, you want it to be catchy. And I think that this could really catch on in the skater community. Sad, dude. So now, while we may not have white nationalists attend the Stop Asian Hate protests, we might have a bunch of teenage skaters and surfers who are going there. So at the very least, I hope this brings some communities together in solidarity. And speaking of bringing people of different backgrounds together in solidarity for an exchange of ideas and love and companionship and growth and thriving, this is the studio. And thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I encourage you to follow the podcast on Spotify, subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, give it a rating, give it a review. Tell your friends about it, tell your colleagues, tell your family. Listen to it in your car and listen to it loudly so that people in other cars are like, whoa, what is that sound? That's a nice voice. That sounds like some hot takes that are relevant and insightful. And they might yell across to you, hey man, what are you listening to in your car? And you'll have your window down and you'll yell back and you'll say, it's the studio with Kristoff Malejczuk. And they'll say, well, how can we find that? And you say, well, you can follow Kristoff on Instagram at Malejczuk. That's my last name, at MALEJCZUK. Thank you once again for listening. This is The Studio with Kristoff Malejczuk.